Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Broadband Planning Workshop Series as part of the Minority Broadband Initiative's College Partnership Program. Once again, my name is Scott Woods. I'm a Senior Broadband Program Specialist here at NTIA, and today we're going to be covering the basics of building broadband infrastructure and the networks and the business plans that run and operate them. So sit back and relax and take notes, and we'll get through this material together. So let's begin. So first, we're going to go through the 5 key steps to developing a business plan. So again, keep in mind this for the community, right? As they work with the local service providers, as they work with either existing service provider or attracting a new service provider to come into the community to build network infrastructure or expand network infrastructure. Again, we're working with them to understand the business aspect of it, right? So many times we spend so much time, we're worrying about the infrastructure, the facilities, but we don't really spend enough time understanding the business side of it. So the purpose of today's presentation is really to walk you through sort of the business overview basics so you can get a better understanding when you have these discussions with the service provider, their business goals, so they can align with the community's goals as you come together to solve and address solutions to solve the challenges in your community. So first, you're always going to make decisions on the network type based on the community roadmap that we talked about before and the partnership assessment. It's very important. Number 2, perform market research. And again, the students who are involved in this project, all of the information, all of the research that you're going to be conducting will help the community understand what's going on in the market. They in turn relay that information to the service provider, and that will help them understand both the demographics and the economic conditions of the target market that they're focusing on. Number 3, you use all of this information to determine the demand service offering, right? So again, we align price with the service. Number 4, we consider the operational requirements of the network, and we align those again to the community's goals and objectives. And then finally, you document the financial projections because, again, on the business side, it's very important that we understand profit, loss, and our costs, and our revenue and income, and all of those associated financials. And so as you begin, you want to consider key questions, right? As we talked about in Module 1, what are your community's objectives? Some will be to connect as many unserved or underserved residents that they can. Some will be to connect critical community anchor institutions, those libraries, those hospitals, expanding connectivity to farming, expanding connectivity to ensure economic development. So again, you need to understand what the community's objectives are as you address the business side of your plan. Next, you're going to ask, what is your targeted customer base? So you've got to understand who your customers are potentially, right? Now, again, we're focusing this subject matter on the business side. So again, we're looking at our target customers. 3, what is the customer's demand? So our end users, right? Is it residential, right? Or is it more wholesale when we're talking about our large-scale critical anchor institutions? So we need to understand the residential service from the business service, from wholesale services as well. And then what are the operational requirements, right? Various different capacities and speed requirements, as we discussed before, they vary between, the residents, your business and your wholesale customers and community as well. And then something that we don't spend a lot of time talking about, but is really key on the business side, is how do you best achieve sustainability? Because ultimately you want to build it, but you want it to be sustainable and you want it to be revenue generating, revenue positive throughout the life of the network. And so we're going to talk about those and consider those as we move forward. So let's consider the customers and the benefits, right? If it's new construction, the key question is, are we expanding an existing network or are we building an entire new network? Generally, if we're expanding a new network, we're working with the local service provider to build off of their existing facilities. If you're building an entire new network, you're either you're working with a new service provider, a new market entrant, or as a municipality or jurisdiction, you've decided to build that network yourself, right? So again, you have to understand, what are we getting here? You have to look at the potential benefits, right? What benefits does the new project provide, right? To specific customers, specific sectors, you name it, you go down the line. Is most important is funding, right? What funding or financing sources are available, both philanthropic, both private, and from state and local and federal government. We're going to look at partners, right? You have to identify those key partners and what do they bring to the table? Do they bring a complementary skill set so that everyone is working together, i.e., pushing and pulling in the same direction? Again, we talked about in the previous slide, understanding the customer base size, who will use the service, how will it be rolled out, when will it be rolled out, who are going to be the early adopters. Those are some of the considerations you're going to ask when determining the customer base. With respect to the solution, will a network alleviate any of the community's problems, right? We just went through COVID. We understand that whether you're a K through 12 student or an institution of higher education student, right, there are some specific issues if you can't do distance learning, if you can't jump on, Zoom and other platforms, Google Cloud platforms, virtual classroom platforms, right? And so your solution must target to alleviate specific problems. And then finally, you have to understand the product and the service offerings that are available. Right? What differentiates them? What are there anything in terms of cost, in terms of applicability? We need to understand the differences in speed and technology and what differentiates those services, because there's a cost element to those approaches, and we need to understand those as well. And then finally, you have to balance all of this information on the business side as you make these key decisions. So let's move to step one and look at the review of the network types. So again, this is a summary of the module one that we talked about when we provided an overview. But we're looking at generally, 5 different types of networks, right? An institutional network that generally connects community organizations or a large scale anchor institutions like schools. Many of our institutions of higher education, they belong to a statewide institution or educational network. But then there are also middle mile, right, which is a wholesale network, and that provides service from an internet point of presence, point to point to an internet point of presence. Again, we talked about this in the opening. Last mile networks are generally connect services to end users, right? There are also interconnection networks. There are networks that are constructed, and their entire business model is to ensure that service providers have a wholesale market to traverse traffic and to connect customers. And that's generally a connection of 2 networks at a designated point. And then open access, a network providing non-discriminatory, and wholesale service generally between the carriers. So interconnection and open access are generally carrier to carrier services. Institutional networks, middle mile and last mile, generate specifically for the type of end user, right? So either last mile residential service end users or businesses, middle mile or your large scale networks, points of presence. And then again, our institutional network customers, our schools, our hospitals, our libraries, those large scale government buildings and services that operate on their own network presence. So if you recall this slide from one of the earlier modules, this is just an overview of the different types of network types that will guide the community's implementation and planning activities, right? It'll vary per location. It varies by cost. And so again, understanding the business side is really key because each one of these approaches has a specific business element, cost element, and revenue element that we have to take into consideration.